The one disclaimer for this video is that these are not ranked in order of how bad the moves were. They're just ranked in order of average annual value for the players. So, with that said, we got to get on with the video because there's a lot of bad teams making a lot of bad moves. There's a lot of repeat offenders as well. So, the first move we're going to talk about is DK Metcalf to the Steelers, which I think has generally gotten positive reviews because people do like when teams acquire good players, and Metcalf is definitely a good player. The compensation for these Seahawks was a second rounder, which is number 52 overall, and then the Steelers and Seahawks swapped 6 and 7 round picks with each other. So the Steelers must have somebody in the early part of the 6 and 7 rounds that they're eyeing up. That makes this move make a ton of sense. I'm just kidding. So the thing is, a meh second rounder for a great number 2 wide receiver is okay. That's pretty good process, I would say, in general. But 4 years at 33 million a year is absolutely wild for a, again, second wide receiver. Metcalf was 38th in yards per route run this year with a much better quarterback than he's going to have in Pittsburgh. So that could be even worse. Also, you really need a specific deep ball and back shoulder ace at quarterback to make the wide receiving options at their disposal work, being Metcalf and Pickens. They are basically identical players. They're strictly deep threats that can kind of mix in slant routes. They can't really do anything too complicated with route running, not the greatest at beating man coverage, kind of turn like cement mixers, as I've heard in the past. So this is a very tough thing to navigate for a quarterback, and they don't have any real options at quarterback at the moment. So that just doesn't make sense. Also, team wise, the Steelers have very slim, young, and cheap talent. So, combined with the fact that they're far from competing with no real way to rise up, this move is just really poor and short sighted. This further locks in the Steelers to being mediocre because, again, they have a bunch of players that are like 27 years old and up, and they're still not close to competing, mainly because they don't have a viable quarterback. So this just doesn't make sense on a ton of levels. A move that does make sense, but is just not the correct move to make, is another move that people like because he's a very good player, even better than Metcalf, is Laramie Tunsil to the Commanders. His deal is not egregious. I'll get into it though. It's 2 years, 25 million per year. Washington swapped a third and a seventh. So number 75 and number 243 for a fourth, being 128. And that's whatever. But they also gave up a second and fourth next year. That's a ton of value being shipped off for a good but not elite tackle, and one that's not super getting up there in age, but is, you know, entering the back end of his prime. So the thing that really makes this not work for Washington is any of the aspects mentioned could kind of work, be it the picks given up or the money Tunsil's making, but in conjunction with each other and with where the Commanders are as a team, I think this is really bad. Tunsil makes the fifth most money for a tackle in 8 years. It's a very large sample size. His best PFF tackle rank is 11th, so pretty far away from where the money is. And that was 2 years ago. So, you know, it's one thing if that's maybe this past year, you can understand overpaying him a bit because, you're feeling good about him coming off that strong year. But that's 2 years ago. That's kind of ancient history as far as the NFL goes. Also, the Commanders need, at the moment, a guard, a tackle, 2 defensive tackles. Javon Kinlaw is terrible. I don't count him. An edge rusher. Wise is not a starter, so I don't count him. And 2 safeties. That's a ton of work. And you're cutting a lot into your money by getting Tunsil. Yes, it's paramount that you do keep Daniels healthy, and Tunsil is a very good pass protector. But I think an underrated part of keeping a quarterback healthy is ensuring that they don't have to pass every single play. And Tunsil is a very poor run blocker, so he's going to hinder their ability to be balanced on offense. And I think because of that, that's going to mean, one, of course, more passing for Daniels. But secondarily, it's also going to mean that Daniels is going to have to run more because quarterback rushing is the most effective rushing. So to compensate for Tunsil being unable to run block at an effective level, they're going to get more hits on Daniels. So this is actually not really going to help keep Daniels healthy. I don't like this for a ton of reasons, and I think this is, again, just more short-sighted behavior from a team. Speaking of being short-sighted, we have the first good team making a bad move in the Chiefs franchise tagging Trey Smith. The value is 1 year, $23 million. That is the most average annual value for an interior offensive lineman. And this is kind of funny. Not if you're a Chiefs fan, but it's kind of funny. His best PFF interior offensive line rank in 4 years is 23rd. Yikes. He's also the fourth and easily worst interior offensive lineman to be franchise tagged since 2009. Just quickly, a big reason interior offensive linemen don't get tagged is because they matter less than offensive tackles, and they get paid like an elite offensive tackle. So paying a less valuable player, like they're the most valuable player at their positional group, I should say, that's not really good process. But the other interior players that have been franchise tagged are Brandon Sheriff, who was tagged twice when he was an elite player, much better than Smith. Joe Tooney, the superior guard for the Chiefs this past year and throughout Smith's career. Logan Mankins as the other one as well. Very good guard. So Kansas City needs guard. They definitely need a better right tackle. This doesn't get talked about enough, but Jawan Taylor is pretty bad. He's a okay. I was going to say good. He's not a good pass blocker, but he's an okay pass blocker. I'd say roughly average. He does, I think, perform well in some specific matchups where his continual false starting not being called can be beneficial with speed off the edge, but that doesn't always work just because players can approach him with power, and also it sometimes gets called. It doesn't usually get called, but there are going to be times where the refs actually perform their duties and call it. So they definitely can upgrade Taylor, and they also need safety, defensive tackle, and edge. That's a lot of needs. So, getting rid of the better guard in Tooney, who is a much better pass blocker than Smith is, and also supplied a little bit of value as a offensive tackle option that wasn't a long-term solution by any stretch, but I'd rather have a guy that can play the more valuable position and just can play another position in general than have a guy that's locked into being a guard that's good but not great. So this is a really rough move, and that's saying a lot because 1-year deals are almost never bad, but this is just really bad value for the Chiefs. Speaking of really bad value for an offensive lineman, we have the Titans getting Dan Moore for 4 years, $21 million a year. This is a move I'm a bit more accepting of because being a bad team, and the Titans are a really bad team, they are going to have to overpay free agents. And they also are going to have to pay a premium for a premium position, such as offensive tackle. And Dan Moore, he did show some promise this past year. He also showed some potential 2 years ago, but he is getting the 8th most average annual value for an offensive tackle who, in 4 years, had his PFF rank be at its best number 42 for a tackle. So Bill Callahan may develop him, but the thing is, just because a coach is really well regarded and can theoretically improve a player doesn't mean you should give him, just slim pickings. Callahan could have developed better players as well, or players with more upside than Moore has. Also, this notion that Callahan is just like a god is certainly not true, because with Bill Callahan and the 7th overall pick, J.C. Latham and Lloyd Cushenberry being added, both really talented players. In the case of Cushenberry, was great the year before being added to the Titans, and also a overall young offensive line getting a year of development. The PFF rank for them this year compared to last year for pass blocking was 1 rank worse. So whatever, that happens. But 14 ranks worse in run blocking. So Callahan, I'm not saying he's necessarily lost his fastball, but he's not just, some wizard that's going to make anything work. He does need to have, some talent to work with. And, he did have a pretty rough year as his first year in Tennessee. So, with that said, the next move is a crazy one. The Super Bowl champs, who are, I would say, pretty safely the best ran team in the league. I really struggle to think of bad moves for them in recent years, but a move that just is not going to age well, more than likely, is the Saquon Barkley extension. Gasp, an elite running back that's old is, you know, potentially not a good long term option. Who would have thought? The deal is 2 years, 21 million a year. That's a lot of money. What really stands out though, beyond even just the overpay, is that 36 million is guaranteed at signing, which for a position that falls off a cliff rapidly, that's absolutely wild. I guess a good example of players not falling off a cliff at this position is the ageless Derrick Henry, who at 30, which is 3 years older than Barkley, was the best running back in the league. You might be thinking again, gasp, Barkley was the best running back. He wasn't. Henry, with a much worse offensive line, had greater than Barkley in yards per attempt, touchdowns, PFF grade, yards after contact, missed tackles forced, and also yards per route run. So basically every aspect of the game. He also, I think, had better PFF pass blocking grade, but it was like very minor, it was like 1 point. So you could say though he was better in every aspect than Barkley. So that is a very rare example of a running back aging gracefully. But the thing is, that's kind of a bad look for Barkley, first of all, that a running back that should be falling off a cliff drastically outperformed you with a worse situation. And also, that's again a rare instance. Barkley needs his athletic abilities also more than Henry does. Henry is just a physical specimen that, even as he ages, he's going to remain like 6'3", and however many pounds, he's huge. Barkley is also really well built, but is more of a home run or bust running back. So if he loses a step, which is certainly reasonable to expect, basically every running back around his age does, and he would then, fall off a good bit, which would just compound the fact that Barkley making 21 million a year versus Derrick Henry making 8 million a year is just not a good situation for the Eagles. I think this is dreadful. I think this really shortens the Super Bowl window for the Eagles, which they certainly have a fair amount of old players, but they also have a ton of young talent as well. And, we project Hurts to be good for a long time. So there was reason to think that the team would be pushing for titles for several years. But I think this move is going to hinder them down the line because I just don't think Barkley is going to be able to live up to the contract. I don't know if any running back is worth this contract as well, but especially a guy that wasn't even the best running back this year. So the next contract I don't like is with the Colts with Charvarius Ward, which I hate. I think Charvarius Ward has gone through so much adversity lately in his life that I wanted to see him just be put in a stellar situation. He's also a great player. So, even more, you want to see good things for him. The Colts overpaid him, though. They gave him a 3-year, 20 million a year contract, which is 6 million more per year than he was projected. And if that's not bad enough, he doesn't fit the Colts timeline. Ward is 29, and the Colts, even after signing Daniel Jones, the great Daniel Jones, they have no viable quarterback, at least at this moment. Maybe Richardson learns how to play NFL quarterback, or maybe Daniel Jones somehow figures out how to play at a higher level than he's ever played before. But I don't think you can bank on those. So my question then is, why go all in right now? I guess this might stem from the fact that Shane Steichen is on the hot seat. So maybe he's pushing for some win now players. But this is just a really bad move for the Colts. The next move that's really bad is with the Jets, surprisingly enough. The ever perfect and well situated at quarterback Jets overpaying for Justin Fields. It's some massive overpay. 2 years, $20 million a year. It's about $9 million a year more than projected, so roughly twice what he was projected to get. In the past 3 years, he hasn't improved one bit, even with different coaches, better teams, etc. He's always had, or not always had, but he's recently had viable supporting cast as well. I know it's in vogue to say that, the Bears just have the worst offensive line in the league, and then the Steelers had just trash all around him. But the situations would have looked much better if they had a good quarterback in place. And by that, I mean, Justin Fields has had the third longest time to throw twice in his career, and he's had the longest time to throw twice in his career. So he is really exaggerating how bad the offensive lines are. And the crazy thing is, with the Steelers, he had like the 25th average depth of target for a quarterback. So he was dinking and dunking, and he still was taking forever and a day to process what was going on. That just, makes everybody's job harder. And I don't understand this notion of him having potential. He's been in the league for more than enough time to show something. And, he's had some good games in his career, but, when you've played like 50 plus games in your career, I would hope you've had a few good games sprinkled in there. And receiver wise, the Steelers definitely don't have a good supporting cast, or they didn't have a good supporting cast at least for him. But George Pickens is a legit wide receiver number one. The offensive line was bad, but it wasn't, unusable. And again, with the Bears, they've actually had solid offensive lines sprinkled in. They've been in the teens per PFF in pass blocking at least 2 years with Fields. So he's had some things. And, DJ Moore, Darnell Mooney, Cole Kmet, those are players that have had success outside of Fields. So they're definitely, respectable options that he's had. So another NFC North connection is a disheartening one because the Packers are generally a pretty well ran organization. They don't always draft in very logical manners, like drafting linebackers, rounds ahead of where they should, and other things that just don't necessarily correspond with winning. But this move that really stands out to me is Aaron Banks at 4 years, $19 million per year. It's a slight overpay. I'm not too worried about the money. $3 million per year over projected. That's whatever. 4 years in the NFL for him, and his best PFF rank was 33rd for a guard. And yet he's 7th most in average annual value for a guard. So that's really rich. And what really makes it not work for me is the fact that Green Bay definitively had 4 solid offensive linemen, and then they just drafted in the first round, number 25 overall, Jordan Morgan, who can kind of play every position along the line. Maybe he's not viable at tackle because he doesn't have very long arms, but you project him to be an interior player, and that's basically how they roll. They have guys that can play lots of positions on the line, so they would have been able to figure out the line in a very good way. They lost Josh Myers, which is probably addition by subtraction. He isn't good at football, and they overdrafted him. That's another example. Instead of Creed Humphrey, of all people, the best center in the league, arguably. So, with that said, the Packers, though, they had a great pass protecting line this past year, and the run blocking was all right. So, you don't need to completely reshape the line, which bringing in Banks kind of is doing that. I don't like this at all. I think this is a ridiculous waste of money. And speaking of waste of money, the Commanders bringing in Deebo Samuel. This is another move that I think has been well regarded, but those people don't know what they're talking about. Deebo Samuel brought in for a 5th round pick, number 148 overall. He is so drastically overpaid. Yes, it's for 1 year, but he is the 14th most average annual value for a wide receiver, despite at best, ideally, being a very low end wide receiver, too. And he also has a game that will definitely age poorly, as he is not a good route runner. He has, at best, inconsistent hands and is just basically entirely predicated on being athletic. He is overweight, so that's, a variable in this. But yeah, he takes a lot of hits. He's been used a lot at running back throughout the years relative to other receiving options. So he's taken even more hits. And, he's basically a yard after catch strictly player, which you hope that Cliff Kingsbury can, set him up to succeed like Kyle Shanahan did. But I'm a little bit standoffish with that because Kyle Shanahan might be the best coach in the league, and Cliff Kingsbury is, I would say, at best divisive. He had a pretty good showing this past year, but I think a lot of that is Jaden Daniels. So you might be downgrading in, situation for Samuel, and Samuel already wasn't showing much life. Additionally, the 1 year, $18 million Samuel's getting just completely wrecks their chances of upgrading the roster, as if the Tunsil move wasn't enough to do that. The Commanders, they still need to upgrade 7 starters. Many are desperate as well, and they only have $19 million in effective cap space. This is an absolute disaster. I don't know what the Commanders were thinking. I guess it stems from the fact that they got to the NFC Championship game, and ignore the fact they got just completely whooped whenever in the game. But maybe they're like, yeah, we just need a wide receiver too. That's what we need, like a low end wide receiver too. That'll you know get close the gap between us and the Eagles. That's just not the case. And you're on the clock with Daniels being on just an outrageously cheap contract relative to the skill he brings. So I don't like this at all. I think this is just terrible in basically every which way. All right, so the next move is one that I'm a little bit less impassioned about, but I still think is a reasonably bad move. is with the Vikings signing Jonathan Allen to a 3-year, $17 million per year contract. The average annual value for a defensive tackle rank of this contract is 16th. So, about average for a defensive tackle one. In 8 years, again, a large sample size, he's maxed out as a solid run defender and has been absolutely awful in back to back years. So, I think it's reasonable to project that he's just a pass rushing specialist. But in the past 3 years, he's peaked at being 14th in pressures for defensive interior players. This is really just weird to me. I do understand the notion of, well, he was good. Maybe we can make him good again. But I just think that falls apart really quickly when you realize, he hasn't been worth his money in 3 years. Is one thing if you have a bad year. You can sort of, kind of, maybe, in a way, argue, 2 bad years, we can fix him still. 3 years, I think you just lock in on him not being the same guy anymore. And it's just really odd to say, like, yeah, you can only rush the passer, and in doing so, you're just all right at it. Let's make you really highly paid. I just don't get that. A very similar signing is there's the Washington connection here with the Commanders. Again, the Commanders are really having a rough offseason. I feel bad for Jaden Daniels and other players, of course, as well. Javon Kinlaw signed 3 years, $15 million per year. I was dumbfounded when I saw that amount. I was like, that has to be like the total. I would have sooner believed that was the total, not the average annual value. That is $6 million per year more than he was projected to get. While again, the team needs a lot. In 5 years for Kinlaw, he's had elite defensive coaches the entire way. San Francisco arguably has the best defensive line coach in the league, and Robert Saleh, the time he spent there with the Jets, he also couldn't get anything out of Kinlaw. So he's still sucked this entire time. Like, he's been actively bad. And he's also worse than Jonathan Allen, who, I just said Jonathan Allen isn't worth this money. But Allen was only $2 million more. And yes, Kinlaw is younger, but it's not like he's, this young player that is still moldable. He's pretty experienced at this point. And though he's experienced, he's shown basically no promise. Very, very similar to Allen in that you can only viably use him as a pass rusher, and there he's fine, but not elite, not even close to being elite. So the Commanders do not know what they're doing. Another team that does not know what they're doing is Carolina, who brought in Tershawn Wharton on a 3-year, $15 million per year contract. Again, I would have sooner believed that the $15 million is for the length of the contract, not a per year. That is $7 million per year more than he was expected to get. And the Panthers, man, they need A to Z. And perhaps even more importantly than that, or I'd say, yeah, more importantly than that, is they desperately need to evaluate Bryce Young. When you draft a rookie quarterback, you are on the clock. And the time is just really ticking, not in their favor, because Young has played 2 years now. You can keep him on a cheap or cheapish contract for 3 more. But the team is so far away from being viable. And, Young just specifically has very little weaponry. His best target by far was Adam Thielen, who is like 97 at this point. So, he might be worse this upcoming year. This money could have been so much better used on signing one of the many receiving options that were available. I mean, they just need so many things on offense. The offensive line, I think, is actually all right. Like, it's definitely viable. So, you don't need the offensive line too much. You probably could have upgraded at some places there, but just like get a freaking target for Young. Like, figure out if this is your guy of the future. So, another mistake by the Chiefs this offseason, which I live for. I dislike bad people, and the Chiefs recruit a ton of them. Nick Bolton not being one of them, to my knowledge. But Nick Bolton is a very overpaid player. They brought him in for, I guess it's actually not fair. He is paid a reasonable number. I would still say an overpay, but the reason it's so bad is because of the fit for the team. So Bolton, 3 years, 15 million per year. That's very high end linebacker money for a guy that's not anywhere near that level. In fact, Leo Chanel vastly outplayed Bolton in back to back years. Drew Tranquil was also better than Bolton this year. So you have 2 better options that are cheaper. What do? You play 2 linebackers basically the whole game. And of course, then you got to make sure you have a third linebacker and make him the highest paid of the bunch, even though he might be the worst of the bunch. This move was an ensuring factor in the Chiefs being forced to restructure contracts, which will hurt them down the line by limiting their cap flexibility in the future. Also, for this year alone, the Chiefs need 5 positions. So that's just not a good use of money. I thought it was a slam dunk. Like, I wouldn't have even thought about bringing Bolton back unless it's like a deal similar to Drew Tranquil's in value, which would be an underpay for Bolton, but it would be, something of that nature to bring him back because, again, he was the 3rd best linebacker this year, and Chanel was, again, better the year before as well. So, you have 2 linebackers already. Why bring in a third that's very limited? He's an exclusively competent run defender, and that's exactly what he was this year. He was just competent against the run. He wasn't great against it. He's very stiff as a pass coverage guy. Can't rush the passer. That limits what Spagnuolo can do with, his blitz schemes. So, very limited player. Could be okay in certain, defenses. Like, if the Patriots would have paid him this 15 million, I would have said that's a little rich. They need a lot of things. But I would understand you desperately need a linebacker. He's young. Maybe get him a different system. Maybe he'll be better. The Chiefs, they know what he is. He's not particularly good. He's making a lot of money. This just doesn't make sense. Another move that absolutely 100% does not make sense. I don't know what the perception of this move has been, but I'd imagine people are a fan of it because, again, good player, doesn't matter anything else. Could sign him to $1 billion contract, and he would be a backup, and people would still be like, "Yeah, let's go." Cooper Kupp to the Seahawks. 3 years, $15 million a year. So the thing about this is that 76% of Cooper Kupp's and Jackson Smith and Jigba's snaps were in the slot. That's just not going to work. The only way you get them both in the slot is if you run a trips formation where, you have an outside receiver, say to the left, and then to the right of that receiver, you have Kupp and JSN, or you go without a tight end, which, that happens like a couple times a season for a team. Maybe not even that. So that's definitely not going to be the case. This is just a horrendous fit, and the money is fine for a very good number 2 receiver. I think it's actually a pretty good deal. But the fit is just so dreadful. And, I think you can expect Kupp or JSN to regress as they're being forced to play a different position. I mean, in the case of JSN, he was at Ohio State playing in the slot. Kupp, he has been primarily a slot receiver for a very long time with the Rams. And the cherry on top is outside wide receivers were still available in free agency. More than likely for similar contracts as well. So, Kupp talent wise, totally fair for this amount. But just, it's not a seamless fit by any stretch. The Seahawks back at it again with DeMarcus Lawrence. 3 years, $14 million a year. $6 million more per year than he was projected. So roughly getting 2 times what he was expected. I was so upset when I saw this because I thought he was going to be a great value signing for a team. You could buy low on him. He had a rough year this past season. He would be, somebody that could greatly outperform his contract. But it's like, his high end performance this year is going to be necessary for this contract to look reasonable. His median outcome, where he's just fine, this is going to be a pretty big overpay. So this is just really bad for the Seahawks. I have nothing else to say regarding that. The next move is with the Colts signing Daniel Jones to a 1-year, $14 million contract. That's $8 million more than he was projected. And this does a really good job, I will admit, of helping the Colts stay mediocre, which seems to be their aspirations. Anthony Richardson, don't get me wrong, he's been awful, but he ensures that you get a winning situation. And by that, I mean, if he hits on his potential, which is unlikely, but is still something, I'd say the chance of him being a great quarterback is actually more likely than Daniel Jones because Daniel Jones has such a large sample size of at best being mediocre. So Richardson, there's still a little bit unknown there. But the thing is, Richardson, he could make the team good, but more than likely, he could make the team really bad, which is favorable over being mediocre. So I would have much rather just kept Richardson and, keep trotting him out there and seeing what can happen, because if you suck, you get a better draft pick, which moves you closer to finding your quarterback of the future. Daniel Jones, I can assure you, is not that. The next move is the Bills with Terrell Bernard. 4 years, $13 million a year. That's the 7th most average annual value for a linebacker. And his best PFF rank in 2 years. Again, kind of a risky proposition with 2 years of being a real contributor for the team. But in 2 years, his best rank was 43rd. That's a bit a ways from, 7th most in value. In a defense as well that doesn't ask much of him in coverage, he was 75th of 78 in linebacker coverage per PFF. I do not get this move. The Bills, they have a very good team, but they definitely have some real weaknesses. So why overpay roughly average linebacker when, your team doesn't really need too much at the linebacker position, especially if you're projecting Matt Milano to be, returning to form. He could very easily be the linebacker one in that situation. This is just a really bad move for the Bills, which, being locked in for 4 years, I dislike that as well. The Bills strike again, this time with a 1-year deal with Joey Bosa, who, again, the casuals must have been hype about, because they've heard of the Bosa name. Joey Bosa brought in on a 1-year, $13 million contract. He was 53rd in edge pressures this year, so a low-end second edge rusher. That's him at his best in the past 3 years because he played less than half the snaps in back-to-back years prior to that. For $5 million more, the Bills could have brought in Khalil Mack, who's actually really good, and was 26th, so a low-end edge rusher 1 in edge pressures. That would have made so much more sense. The Packers, again on the list, unfortunately for them, with Nate Hobbs. I thought Hobbs was going to be a good budget signing as well, like I did with Lawrence, but it turns out teams just be crazy. Hobbs brought in on 4 years, $12 million per year, $8 million more than expected per year, of course. He wasn't even the best nickelback available. Mike Hilton, Jonathan Jones, Kendall Fuller, they were all better options and more than likely, or in the case of Jones, guaranteed to be cheaper. So this just is whack. Maybe their hope is that Hobbs, who hasn't been tasked with outside corner play, could figure that out. He does have the size for it. But why bank on that? You could have just signed a guy that's actually good at outside corner, which there were a ton of guys available for that. This move is just ridiculous. Another move that I wouldn't say actually is ridiculous, it's just bad, is the Jets signing Brandon Stevens for 3 years, $12 million a year. That's $7 million a year, more than he was projected. Aaron Glenn loves his man coverage. He runs it at probably the highest percent of anyone in the league, and that's with backup corners, no less. So he was running it like 50% of the time, I want to say. And with that said, Stevens was 63rd in man coverage grade for cornerbacks this year per PFF. What is this fit? What is this, what is this price? I don't get it. At that amount, they could have just, kept DJ Reed, who's like Stevens, but just much better. I mean, he's a smaller player, but he plays man coverage much better than Stevens does. So the Panthers back at it again, overpaying edge rushers. And this time with a guy that's like probably replacement level in Patrick Jones. 2 years, $10 million a year. Pretty hefty contract. Double what he was expected. Actually, more than double what he was expected. So that paired with the fact he was 75th, so, third edge rusher, all right, third edge rusher at that, in pressures, 39th in edge run defense grade per PFF, so that's all right. But gets 34th most edge average annual value. I just am dumbfounded with this approach by the Panthers, especially because they have Jadeveon Clowney too, who is just so much better than Jones in every way imaginable. I mean, I guess Jones is younger, so if you want to say that's like something he's better than Clowney at, being young, he's got Clowney there. But yeah, Jones not worth his contract at all. With the Jaguars, De'Ami Brown, 1 year, $10 million, $7 million more than he was projected. So more than 3 times the value he was expected. I don't understand overpaying him. Maybe I'm missing something, but Brown's best year in yards per route run in 4 years is 70th. That's as Jaden Daniels is better than Trevor Lawrence, at least, for this past season. Lawrence could figure things out and reach his immense potential, and Daniels might, regress. But just for this year, Daniels better option. In 16 games, dude had less yards than teammates Noah Brown, who played 11 games, Austin Eckler, the running back that's washed up, who played 12 games, and the corpse of Zach Ertz. This is a very interesting signing. I'll just leave it at that. Atlanta, they signed Leonard Floyd to a 1 year, $10 million contract. Every edge just getting overpaid, it seems. He played for the 49ers and every defensive lineman, basically without exception, because they, again, have probably the best defensive line coach in the league. They play their best in San Francisco. And Leonard Floyd, his PFF grade or rank for edge rusher was 102nd, pretty good, right? Being like an edge rusher 4. The year before that, he was 86th. Atlanta, with this move, helps keep their rich history of bad, overpaid defensive linemen alive. I can't say anything beyond that. The Bills just really struggling this offseason, just seemingly signing players at random, bringing in Larry Ogunjobi on a 1 year, $8 million deal. I got a pretty good sample size with this one, I'd say. In 7 years, Ogunjobi, in the past 7 years, his rookie year, he was good. But, I think the 7 most recent years count a little bit more than, the rookie year 8 years ago. Ogunjobi, his best PFF rank in that stretch is 63rd. This year, for Pittsburgh, who have a much better defensive line than the Bills, no shade at the Bills, the Steelers just might have the best defensive line in the league this past year. The Eagles definitely competing for that, especially with that dominant Super Bowl performance. But either way, the Steelers, amazing defensive line, ensuring, Ogunjobi never once gets double teamed. No team's even thinking about double teaming him with all the talent the Steelers have and, the waves of talent they have. He was still 94th for a defensive interior in PFF grade. For just $3 million more, they could have gotten a way better Grady Jarrett. This just is absurd what the Bills are doing. Another move on the defensive line that just doesn't really make sense is the Cowboys overpaying Dante Fowler. 1 year, $8 million. That is a mere $2 million more than he was projected, which, I'm not going to let them totally off the hook with that one because, $2 million on an $8 million contract is kind of a sizable amount, but still, I'm not too worried about that. What I am worried about is DeMarcus Lawrence, who they let walk for just $3 million more, was a much better player in regards to his baseline, his upside, and his fit, as he is an elite run defender, whereas Fowler is pretty darn bad in that regard. And, the Cowboys do need help in defending the run. They were abysmal in that regard. So this just is so illogical. And, I don't get it. There's not really an age difference. Fowler is 2 years younger than Lawrence. So, maybe that's a factor, but it shouldn't be, because Lawrence basically every year of his career has been better than Fowler. I'm not sure about this one, to put it lightly. Another one I'm not sure about is Washington again with Marcus Mariota. 1 year, $8 million. The money, perfectly fine for a good backup quarterback. But with how bad Washington's team is, I'd rather use that money to fill out the roster and gamble on a backup and just say, if we need a backup quarterback, then so be it. Maybe some scrub can fill in at a level similar to Mariota, considering this new backup has a better supporting cast from the money we saved. It's just, Mariota's not going to help them win a Super Bowl. An offensive lineman might. The Jaguars signed Eric Murray to a 3-year, $7 million per year contract. That's the 29th highest average annual value for a safety, so starter money. In 9 years, he's never been so much as an average safety for PFF. Maybe they hate him. Maybe he's just not good. I don't know. Atlanta strikes again with a front seven signing. Divine Diablo, great name, not great player. 2 years, $7 million a year. That's $3 million a year more than he was expected to get. He gets low-end linebacker 1 money for a guy that's a low-end linebacker 2. He also doesn't help with Caden Ellis's coverage. Ellis, very good player. Not bad in coverage, just not good at it. So I think the ideal fit is, Ellis, really good in basically every other aspect of the game, but coverage where he's just, fine. I think you balance that out with a pass coverage specialist. So that would have made sense to me. The Falcons decided against that. The next move is with the Chargers, who haven't been active in this free agency period, aside from, letting some players go. They bring in Dante Jackson to a 2-year, $7 million per year contract. That's $3 million a year more than he was projected. The average annual value for a cornerback is 35th for him. So, a definitive starter. But the best PFF rank for him in the last 4 years is 63rd. So, high-end starter money for a player that's at his best recently, a low-end starter, on the outside at least. He also is kind of confusing in the sense that he is at his best in man coverage, and a lot of the schemes have accommodated for that and played, man with him, but he's going to a zone heavy scheme for the Chargers. So, bad player plus bad fit plus bad contract. I think it's a bad deal. Another bad deal is with the Bengals bringing back Joseph Asai on a 1-year, $7 million contract, $3 million more than expected. The average annual value for an edge rusher is 45th. His best PFF rank so far in, I believe, 4 years is 85th. I kind of am of the mindset that, you just give up on him at that point. Maybe he could figure it out on another team, but, on a very cheap deal. So I don't like having to bet on this guy. Nothing against him. It's just, I don't think he's a good player, to put it bluntly. Another guy that's not a good player that's in the AFC North is with the Steelers again, Malik Harrison. He is on a 2-year, $5 million per year contract, which, do you know how hard it is for players in this like $5 million and less area to be bad contracts? You gotta really be bad for that to be the case, or just like a really absolutely terrible fit. Harrison, he doesn't make sense because Elandon Roberts, he's 4 years older than Harrison. I'll concede that. But Roberts is $2 million cheaper. Again, pretty sizable when you're talking about these smaller contracts. And Roberts was great back-to-back years. Just like full stop, one of the best run defending linebackers in the league, and has been all right in coverage. He survived in that area. So Harrison, though, his best year in 5 years, is still being awful, and they're the exact same type of player. They're both run defenders. The Steelers just don't make any sense to me. They make moves that suggest they're all in, and then they sign Harrison, who the only thing he has over Roberts is the fact he's younger. But, bring in a baby at that point. The baby's going to suck, but they're going to be really young. Malik Harrison, he's going to suck, but he's older than the baby. I don't understand why you prefer Harrison over Roberts or the baby. For the Seahawks, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, their DK Metcalf replacement. They are similar in height, and I would say they're probably still pretty similar in speed as well, so basically the same player, right? Scantling, or Valdez-Scantling rather, 1 year, $4 million contract. Super reasonable for a, guy that's going to start at receiver. I was going to say starting caliber. He's not a starting caliber receiver. That's 2 times what he was projected, though. He is making the 50th most in average annual value for a wide receiver. So wide receiver 2 money, and he's going to be their third wide receiver, so that's not really bad. But though he was force-fed, he ended up being 68th in yards per route run. That's, again, a ways away from the value he's getting. His best PFF rank in 7 years is 71st, even wider away from that contract value. The thing is, Demarcus Robinson, maybe Robinson realized the Seahawks are being ran into the ground and didn't want to sign there, but Robinson is a much better primary deep threat option that was available. And, the Seahawks didn't go that route. The Browns, for the final move of this video, you had to figure the Browns would be involved in some way, even though they haven't been active in free agency much. They couldn't help themselves but to make a bad decision. And they're the only team that are on this list for releasing a player. Dalvin Tomlinson was released. They save $6 million this year. So, pretty good amount. But the caveat is they have $15 million in dead cap over the next 3 years. This is a move that suggests they're all in on this season alone, shortening their title window, question mark. If you can call it a title window, they're one of the worst teams in the league this past season and have lost some talent. So they're condensing their time to win with this move by hurting themselves in the future. And in doing so, they lose a really solid veteran player. Tomlinson, his worst PFF rank in 8 years is 57 out of 130 for a defensive interior. Still being a starter level player at his worst in a large sample size, you got to get rid of that player at all costs. You got to lose money in the process and, need to replace him with a lesser player just to set the vibes right. I don't know. Maybe there's something to it. Maybe Tomlinson looked at Myles Garrett the wrong way and, you had to get rid of him as a result. Maybe he called him a slur, much in the same way that Mason Rudolph imaginarily did. I don't know. But, just from the outside, this looks like a really bad move from a team that is generally really bad. Those are my thoughts on the worst moves of free agency so far. Be sure to let me know what yours are in the comment section. And also be sure to like and subscribe for more football content.